Hi, my name is Luke Marushka, and I'm a senior at Bennett Academy. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to do this interview. Would you please provide your name and some of your background information about your education and career?
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. My name is Geoff Miller. I'm a finance professional. I went to school at Northwestern University and subsequently got my MBA at Stanford University. Started my career in investment banking, actually in the Chicagoland area. Worked at Baird and their services and technology group for a couple of years before moving to San Francisco, where I joined a private equity firm, Genstar Capital, where we focused on mid-market buyouts of late-stage businesses. I spent most of my time in investing in technology businesses. Spent 13 years at Genstar before recently joining a firm called Juxtapose, where we invest in earlier stage businesses and actually build businesses from scratch.
Okay, perfect. Now, I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about business ethics and how ethics have helped you answer questions or make decisions as a business leader. Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you have a set of ethical principles that you use when faced with difficult questions or situations in your career?
I do. I'm a big believer in really sort of three principles through the lens of decision making and in conversations with others. I'm a big believer in looking at everything through the lens of honesty, transparency, and consistency. I think it's really important to apply consistent decision making frameworks, and I think communicating those making frameworks in a transparent way allows you to have a common set of principles with the people you're interacting with. And then importantly, the overlay of honesty to all of to those dimensions builds a tremendous amount of trust with the partners you work with, your peers, your direct reports and employees. The combination of the three is really sort of the powerful is the power that actually creates sort of the ethical framework.
Now, would you be able to provide an example of a situation in your business career that you faced in which you applied these principles?
Sure. I think there I think that there's a lot that happens in the course of sort of hiring and having to part ways with employees where these types of frameworks become really important. I'll just use like one big example tends to be in compensation frameworks and for employees that you might need to part ways with at a company. One of the things that you often struggle with is either the payment of severance or the payment of or in some cases it could be the vesting of equity. And you always face this interesting question when that employee is leaving, because they're not going to be contributing meaningfully to your company going forward. But you've made a promise to them. You've set up a set of principles that both you and they agreed to at the point in which they joined your company. And I think that there are folks in the business world that look at that question and look at that problem from a purely economical perspective, and will look for opportunities to sort of abrogate those responsibilities and actually look for ways to benefit the sort of the continuing shareholders in the company first. I'm a big believer in, again, like if you think about those three principles, you've built a consistent framework, you've communicated it transparently, and it's your obligation to be honest and follow through with the commitments that you've made. And so that's a version of a decision and an obligation that I feel like is always really important when you're leading employees and trying to build a reputation of a good place to work, a good partner, whether that's a leader, an executive, or a capital partner in my case. That's one example I'd use.
Okay, that's perfect. Do you think that any particular business question, decision, or situation represents a difficult ethical issue?
Hmm. You know, the, I think there are often situations where business leaders are faced with challenging decisions related to growth and customers that they may that may offer sort of near-term gains, but erode long-term trust in either a company or institution. And I'd say that kind of the classic example of that is maybe working with a customer that might be owned by a state-owned enterprise in a country that that the U.S. has deemed us to not be allowed to do business with. And I can even think in my last company, in the middle of some conflict that was taking place, some of the emergent global conflict that's taking place. We were asked by a large Russian company to provide training, and it was a big contract, a large Russian paper company to provide safety training, and it was a challenging question because it was a meaningful contribution to that quarter's sales goals. There were some real questions as to sort of the customer behind the company. And there were some emergent questions around sort of, what might happen from a geopolitical perspective and our ability to do business with that company going forward. And, those I think are some of the hardest questions because they're gray, right? In some ways, like the ethical framework that I provided you earlier allows for you to easily make the black and white decisions. It's the gray decisions that I think are the hardest, where you have to exercise some level of judgment about either the future or what you want or what you think, what signal a certain decision might make to a company. And so that I think in that specific example, we ultimately decided not to take on that customer, and it hurt our growth in that instance. But we knew that there was some risk that company that we might not be allowed to transact with that company even 12 or 15 months forward. So those are, I think, the hardest decisions, is when you have an opportunity to realize some short-term gain, and it's a bit of an unknowable erosion of sort of long-term value, either through trust or really trust in partners. Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. Do you have any advice that you can provide for me as I think about ethical issues that I may face one day in my career?
I think the biggest advice is probably to come up with your own framework and figure out what set of values you believe most strongly in, and practice. Put your, think through, situations where those values might be tested, and play out the decisions that you would make, and think about how you would feel about yourself making one decision or the other, or if we often talk about like the newspaper test or the grandmother test. Like if you're if a story was written about that decision in the New York Times, or you were telling your grandmother about a story about that interaction, how would you feel? So but I think everybody's ethical frameworks are a little bit different, and they have to be true to themselves. And so I think my biggest advice is to self-reflect and think about what's important to you.
Okay. Okay. Well, once again, thank you for your time, Mr. Miller. This has been very helpful.